Hello, everyone, and welcome back to True Crime Guru. I'm your host, Brock Scales. Today, I will be bringing you yet another tragic MMIW case. And for those of you who may not know, MMIW stands for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women. I feel like I haven't done enough of these cases, and I really am trying to rectify that. Although the sad truth is, when it comes to MMIW cases, they are really hard to even come by, even though there are an alarming number of them. And B, they are kind of difficult to research because there usually isn't a whole lot of official information out there. And today's case is one of those. On October 16th, 2005, a passerby in Independence, Missouri, would locate a body in a gravel lot wrapped up in a blanket. The victim would later be identified as 22-year-old Lakota Renville, and it would be determined that young Lakota had been badly beaten and stabbed multiple times. And yet, nearly 20 years later, Lakota's killer has yet to be identified. Just a quick disclaimer, today's case does include some potentially triggering topics such as domestic violence and sex trafficking, so please watch with care.
Good evening. It has been more than 17 years since Lakota Renville's body was found in Independence, Missouri. Today, the South Dakota girl's loved ones are still seeking answers and hoping for an arrest.
I think when a person loses somebody, they tend to think that, okay, the funeral's over, now you go on. It doesn't work like that. It's like it happened yesterday.
Julie Watts' daughter, Lakota Renville, has been gone from this earth for 18 years, almost as many years as she was on it.
As of the day that this video comes out on July 7th, 2024, Lakota Renville would have turned 41 years old yesterday. She was born on July 6, 1983, to her mother, Julie Keeble Watts, in Sisseton, South Dakota. Lakota was a member of the Sisseton Waipeta Aode tribe. And my sincerest apologies if I did not pronounce that correctly. Please feel free to correct me if I was wrong. Lakota would spend her entire upbringing in South Dakota. And as far as I can tell, the identity of her biological father has never been revealed. But I do know that Julie eventually married a man named Norman Watts, and it seems that he considered Lakota and her siblings as his own children. According to her older sister, Waynette, Lakota was always a quote-unquote good girl. She was not the type to go out and party or test her boundaries with her parents or anything like that. And that is largely because she was a very shy and reserved person, but at the same time, really compassionate and empathetic. Her mother, Julie, recalled to investigative reporter Sarah Plake with KSHB Kansas City that she remembered Lakota loving animals and that she would often bring home classmates for meals that she felt were being neglected in their own homes. Also, a quick side note, I want to give a big shout out to Sarah Plake with KSHB. Her reporting is where I got a lot of my information. And actually, the entire investigative team at KSHB has put in a lot of work producing an entire series on MMIW cases in Kansas City. So I give them all of the credit in the world for that. When it came time for Lakota to graduate high school, her sister Waynette said that Lakota was so shy that she even considered not walking at graduation. But despite her quiet and shy nature, Lakota was really looking forward to spreading her wings and branching outside of the Sisseton area after graduation. And this opportunity would come about, but maybe not necessarily in the best way. Like a lot of young people around this time, Lakota was known to have frequented online chat rooms. Now, online safety is a topic that is widely talked about today, but the internet was so new in the early 2000s, and the dangers of it were not as well known. And for someone like Lakota, who was quiet and maybe a little bit naive, that made her particularly vulnerable to online predators. Sometime around 2003 or 2004, Lakota had met a man in one of these chat rooms, and she had traveled 7 hours away to Kansas City, Missouri to meet him. And as far as I can tell, she basically never came back. She was living with this man that she referred to as her boyfriend in Kansas City. Now, the identity of this man has never been made public, and so that I don't have to keep referring to him as the boyfriend, I will call him Jeremy throughout this episode. Lakota would find that life with Jeremy was not like she imagined. It wouldn't be long before Jeremy became abusive towards her and would even start to sex traffic her. Which really raises the question whether or not Jeremy had utilized this chat room to groom Lakota for sex trafficking, which is something that was very much going on back then and even today with social media. Like most victims, Lakota was not very open about what was really going on in Kansas City, but she did tell Julie once that Jeremy had tied her up and left her in the basement for 3 whole days. And she would eventually confess to her sister Waynette that she was doing sex work. All of this, of course, was extremely concerning for Lakota's family, and Julie was desperate for Lakota to just come home. In the spring of 2005, Waynette had even sent money to Lakota so that she could come home. And she did, but she would only stay for a few days before going right back, which really showcases just how much of a hold these traffickers have on their victims. Now, Lakota did have a cell phone, but Julie says that when she would call, Lakota usually called from a payphone. Now, I found this interesting because why would she call from a payphone if she had a cell? Now, there could be a couple of different reasons for that. A lot of you might remember that a lot of cell phones back then were powered by minutes. And for some younger people, minutes were basically how many minutes you had to talk on your phone during a particular billing cycle. So that could be the reason why Lakota had called from a payphone to her family. But the reason that I found this interesting is because it could be possible that Jeremy was often going through Lakota's call records, and maybe he didn't like it when she made calls to home, which could further show just how much control that he had over her. The last time that Julie had talked to Lakota was on Saturday, October 15th, 2005. Lakota told Julie that she would call back the very next day, but Julie told Sarah Blake, quote, "Tomorrow never came," end quote. The very next day, Sunday, October 16th, 2005, someone who was passing by on Pitcher Road in Independence, Missouri, noticed what they thought was a pile of trash in a gravel lot. But when they took a closer look, they were horrified when they noticed a human head. The female body was wrapped up in carpet padding, which was then wrapped in a blanket. She was completely nude, and there were obvious signs of physical trauma. The body would later be identified through fingerprints to be that of 22-year-old Lakota Renville. Back in Sisseton, Julie was waiting around anxious and worried because she had been expecting that call from Lakota. But when the phone rang, there was nothing but devastating news on the other end. Norman Watts later said that both he and Julie just broke down crying, and that it was determined that Lakota was badly beaten and stabbed multiple times. As far as I can tell, her exact cause of death has never been released, but she had undoubtedly been met with extreme violence. and the Independence Police Department knew that they had an extremely brutal homicide on their hands. Shortly after her murder, Lakota's family traveled to the site where her body was located to perform tribal ceremonies to, quote, recover her soul and take it back to her home reservation, end quote. Lakota's case is one of those where police have not released a ton of information. But it's not one of those cases where I think this is because they have not properly investigated. I truly believe that they are just being careful about what they release to the public. And I think this because they have openly spoken with the media. However, they have been extremely careful and sometimes vague about what they have said to the media. What we do know is that Lakota was found wrapped up in carpet padding and also a very distinctive looking blanket. It is a dark blue blanket with kind of a desert theme to it, and it has a large steel skull in the middle. Investigators are desperate to get this blanket out there because of its distinctive nature. It is very possible that someone may recognize this from someone's house or someone's car, maybe. I know that if I saw a blanket like this, I would definitely recognize it from someone that I know. Investigators have also not said whether or not they have tried to track down the manufacturer of the blanket. Although, in my opinion, it doesn't really look like something that was massively produced. It kind of looks like something that you might have bought at a flea market or maybe even like a small mom and pop kind of store. So I definitely ask that you share this blanket along with Lakota's story because I believe that someone may recognize it, whether from someone that they know or maybe even the person who made the blanket or someone who might have sold it would recognize it. Another thing that the police have shared is that an officer patrolling the area on the day that Lakota was discovered reported seeing an early 1990s Ford Explorer in the area where the body was dumped. This vehicle could have nothing to do with Lakota's murder, but it also could, and investigators have never been able to track down the driver of the Explorer. One thing that we do not know is just how long Lakota's body had been there. However, according to Kansas City Crime Stoppers, neighbors had told the police that the quote-unquote trash had not been there as of 7 a.m. on October 16th. Investigators were also able to determine that Lakota had been with a John as late as 3 o'clock in the morning. So theoretically, this could put the murder anywhere between 3 and 7 o'clock in the morning. We also know that Lakota spoke with her mother on the 15th, so that definitely means that her body had not been there for like days or anything. In regard to physical evidence, there was DNA located. We do not know what kind of DNA it was, but it has been reported that it was obtained through Lakota's rape kit, which leads a lot of people to surmise that it might have been semen. Whether or not Lakota had been sexually assaulted has also not been released, although this may have been hard to determine since Lakota was being trafficked and was actively working that night. I would be curious to know whether or not any physical evidence had been obtained from the carpet padding, or maybe even the blanket, since these are both things that people have very close physical contact with. Another interesting thing to be found was a phone number that was written on Lakota's left hand. Police have not elaborated on whether they have tracked down the owner of this phone number or if they have spoken with this person. I can only hope that they did, since this seems to be a rather easy thing to track down, but we really just don't know. Lakota's cell phone was determined to have been stolen, and as far as I can tell, it has never been recovered. I don't know if it was stolen prior to the murder or the night of. However, there were roughly about 50 calls made from Lakota's phone after the murder. I don't know if investigators had attempted to locate the phone, But it is important to note that triangulation was not as precise back in 2005 as it is today. I would be curious to know if they had attempted to locate any of the people who were called, though, or if those people had been interviewed, because this could have easily led them to the person who had the phone. Early in the investigation, several people were interviewed, starting with the last client that Lakota was known to have been with. And it has been reported that this man was ruled out through DNA, as well as the rest of the people that were interviewed. The one person who has been a main point of interest, at least to the public and Lakota's family, is Jeremy. What he does or doesn't know is honestly a mystery. We do know that most female victims of homicide are killed by an intimate partner, and the fact that there is a component of domestic violence in there even further increases the probability of Jeremy's involvement. However, I can only assume that his DNA would have been collected and compared, but I do not know that for sure. Investigative reporter Sarah Plake does know the true identity of Jeremy, and she says that she was not able to get in contact with him. And as far as I can tell, he maintains his innocence to this day, even having called Waynet in 2017 denying any involvement. Then there is, of course, the very real possibility that Lakota may have been murdered by a John. This is a very common theme when it comes to the murders of sex workers and trafficking victims, which kind of circles back to this mysterious phone number that was written on Lakota's hand and the blanket. I really believe that this blanket could be the key to solving this case, which is why I am calling to all of you to please share Lakota's story and a photo of this blanket. I will have a post ready to go on all of the channel's social media accounts, so please, it really only takes 2 seconds to share. Another thing that could help solve this case is, of course, the DNA. I will always firmly believe that anytime there is DNA, it makes the case so much more solvable. Detectives have said that the DNA is ran through CODIS regularly, and even hinted to Sarah Plake that they were doing something with the DNA, which kind of makes me wonder if they are considering possibly doing phenotyping, which is trying to create a physical profile from the DNA, or might even be possibly considering the forensic genealogy angle. As the last nearly 19 years have gone by, Lakota Renville's family has been desperately waiting around for answers. They have become a part of the overwhelmingly large community of families with missing and murdered Indigenous people, and they actively participate in an MMIW walk every year for Lakota. The local Kansas City Indian Center has not forgotten about Lakota either. Every year on the anniversary, they perform a ceremony at the site where she was found. The executive director told Sarah Plake that they want Lakota's family to know that there are still people out there advocating for Lakota and bringing awareness to her case. Lakota Renville only lived 22 years, but she was still able to touch the lives of the people around her in that short time. She never really got the opportunity to live her life because she fell victim to an online predator that thrashed her into a world of violence that ultimately led to her murder. I again ask you to please share Lakota's story and that blanket so that we can maybe find out who killed Lakota and that her killer can be brought to justice. If you have any information about the murder of 22-year-old Lakota Renville on October 16, 2005, you are urged to contact the Independence, Missouri Police Department at 816-325-7300. You can also tip anonymously with the Kansas City Crime Stoppers at 816-474-8477. Or you can submit a tip online at kccrimestoppers.com or text TIP 452 to 274 637. Investigative reporter Sarah Plake also says that you can leave a tip with her by emailing sarah.plake@kshb.com. If you or someone you know is currently a victim of human trafficking, please contact the National Human Trafficking Hotline at 888-373-7888. In addition, if you or someone you know is currently experiencing intimate partner violence, please call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 800-799-7233. Thank you, everyone, for watching and hearing Lakota's story. I will be back in 2 weeks with a brand new episode and case. To ensure that you do not miss out on any content, please make sure that you are subscribed and have notifications turned on. While you're at it, go ahead and follow the channel on all social media platforms. If you have a case in mind for the channel, please do not hesitate to hit me up on social media, or you can email your suggestion to truecrimeguruchannel@gmail.com. Thank you, everyone, and please stay safe.